as this month is Black History Month, I want to begin this sermon on the soul by sharing a brief biography of a person in the civil rights movement, who was someone who I didn't know anything about until several years ago. Someone in this congregation educated me. And her story is a remarkable story. Fannie Lou Hamer was born in 1917 in rural Mississippi, the youngest of 20 children born into a farming family. In her early childhood, her family's farm was thrust into bankruptcy when white supremacists poisoned her family's livestock for no other reason than to punish a financially independent black family. They persisted. Her family turned to sharecropping. Fannie Lou received an unequal education in a school that only opened during the winter season when children were not working in the field. She learned how to read by reading the Bible in church on Sundays. She persisted. Fannie Lou Hamer married and adopted 2 children. One child died of a hemorrhage after being refused treatment at a whites-only hospital. She persisted. Later, she went through a health crisis of her own, requiring surgery, and during that surgery, she was sterilized involuntarily, without consent, by a white surgeon according to the state's medical practices in those days. She persisted. In the early 1960s, she became an activist. She attempted to register to vote and was administered a literacy test that asked her to explain arcane legal theory. Her voter registration was denied, but she persisted. As punishment for attempting to register to vote, she and her husband were fired and evicted from the farm where they were sharecroppers. They persisted. She attempted to register to vote a second time, and again was told that she had failed the so-called literacy test. She persisted, declaring, "Then you will see me every 30 days until I am registered to vote." The third time she attempted to register to vote, she was successful, but when she went to vote, she was told that her voter registration had been suspended due to the non-payment of back poll taxes. She persisted. Becoming even more of an activist, she traveled throughout Mississippi organizing voter registration efforts. For this work, she was arrested alongside other activists, taken to a police station where she was brutally tortured. The torture she suffered left her eyesight and her kidneys permanently damaged. She persisted and responded by joining Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign and leading political organizing, brave political organizing throughout the South, undeterred. Fannie Lou Hamer died in 1977 at the age of 59. The inscription on her gravestone bears perhaps her most famous saying, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." A statement of persistence. So last month I gave a sermon called How to Grow a Soul. It was a good sermon in the sense that actually several people told me that it was a good sermon and gave me good and interesting feedback. I wasn't satisfied with it, though. I felt like there was more that I wanted to say. In that sermon last month, I drew on diverse sources, including a whimsical poem by Wisława Szymborska, my own experiences of visiting an elderly man named Ernie, a brainstorming session held by members of the worship ministry, and the inspiring words of Brian Stevenson. Mixing all those together, I talked about two ways that we might grow our soul. One way was very concrete. I said, we grow our soul by crossing borders and breaking down boundaries of division, by connecting, getting uncomfortable, and as Brian Stevenson says, getting proximate with people from whom we are estranged in this society. For Brian Stevenson, this looked like connecting with people on death row. For me, it looked like serving on the caring committee of my church at age 19 and developing a friendship with a man in his 80s. For a member of the worship ministry, it looked like volunteering in the women's shelter. The second way of growing a soul I talked about wasn't concrete at all, but rather abstract. I talked about paying attention to moments of emotional complexity, poignancy, because those moments are oftentimes of soul growth. For this, I drew my inspiration from the poet Szymborska's observation that joy and sorrow aren't two different feelings for the soul. The soul attends us only when the two are joined. As well as from a member of our church's testimony that her soul grows during those times when love is wedded to heartbreak, when gratitude and loss cohabitate. So that was my sermon from 2 weeks ago, but ever since preaching that sermon, I had this lingering sense that I had left something out, that there was something more that I wanted to say, that I should have said. And what I wanted to say, I came to discover, what I wanted to add had to do with persistence, with resistance, with resilience, with determination. The soul is connected with persistence and resistance. And so that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. How to Grow a Soul 2.0, remixed and rebooted. There were actually two Wisława Szymborska poems I considered choosing last month. To two poems by that great poet that I know of that deal with the soul. And the one I didn't choose is a poem called Nothing's a Gift. Nothing's a gift, it's all on loan. And that poem deals with the existential reality that anything and everything that we have can be taken from us. And the poet doesn't just mean material possessions. She means everything. Everything we own, everything we have, everyone we love, every skill and talent we possess, right down to our physical selves, our bodies, our eyesight, our senses, our mobility, our hair. Nothing's a gift, it's all on loan, says the poet. The poem calls to mind the biblical story of Job, the man who loses everything. Nothing's a gift, it's all on loan, says the poet, with one exception. The soul. The soul is the only thing, the poet says, that no one can possibly take away from you. The soul is the only thing that no one can possibly take from you. The soul persists. The soul is resilient. And it was that poem that made me think of the life of Fannie Lou Hamer. Can take my family's farm, can take my child, can take my ability to register to vote. You can take my job and my home. You can take my uterus without my consent. You can take my eyesight, my organs, my blood, but you cannot take my spirit and you cannot take my soul. Amen. You cannot take my soul. I will persist. The soul is connected with persistence. It's connected with resilience. So happens that this month, this Black History Month, Unitarian Universalist churches that follow theme-based ministry, the theme is resilience. Resilience. And there is undeniably and obviously this connection between the stories and the music and the literature and the history we're called to celebrate and honor this month, and the spiritual theme of resistance, resilience. The resilience is in the songs. We'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. There is more love somewhere. I'm going to keep on till I find it. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Resilience. It's there in Maya Angelou's famous poem, And Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Still I rise. Resilience. It's there in the words of Mother Pollard, the 73-year-old elder at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, who participated in the Montgomery bus boycott and said, "My feet are weary, but my soul is rested." Resilience. It's there in the great African-American liberation theologian Howard Thurman, who had this to say about resilience. He said, "Resilience is to watch a gathering darkness until all light is swallowed up completely without the power to interfere or bring a halt. Then in that darkness to continue one's journey with one's footsteps guided by the illumination of remembered radiance." Resilience, I'm going to read that again. Resilience is to watch a gathering darkness until all light is swallowed up completely without the power to interfere or bring a halt. Then, in the midst of that darkness, to continue one's journey with one's footsteps guided by the illumination of remembered radiance. Remembered radiance. Resilience. It's there in the life story of Fannie Lou Hamer. I do not need to tell you that we live in troubled and troubling times. That we live in a world sick with emboldened hatreds, metastatic racism, virulent anti-Semitism. That we live in a time when cherished rights and core freedoms are under unrelenting attack. That we live in a time in which valuable institutions are imperiled. That we live in a time in which democratic norms appear to have faltered. I don't need to tell you this because you talk to me about your grief, heartache, heartbreak, anxiety, worry, sleepless nights, and simmering rage. And so I ask, what does resilience look like in these times? Resilience, it just so happens, is having a bit of a renaissance moment these days. If you go to the psychology and self-help section of any bookstore, you'll find dozens of books about how to be more emotionally resilient. I've ever told you about my virtual friendship with Guy Lynch? Guy Lynch's. So more than a decade ago, I got this email out of the blue from a psychologist from New York named Guy Lynch, who had been reading my sermons that I had posted online, and he emailed me to tell me that he liked them. And we struck up an email exchange, and shortly thereafter, I look at the New York Times bestseller list, and he's there. And one of his TED Talks went viral. And we talked for like, a few weeks, 10 years ago, but he still likes pictures of my cat that I post on Facebook, which I think is cool. So where was I going with this? If you look at his books and talks and articles, they are all about how to be more resilient psychologically. And I have to be careful with what I say, because we have in this church, we have a psychology professor who specializes, his specialty is resilience. We have a number of psychological practitioners who at the core of their work is resilience. Beyond psychology, resilience is a buzzword that pops up in education and in other disciplines. A friend of mine shared with me that one of the new student goals in their school district is for students to develop their sense of grit, which is the ability to practice resilience. But what I'm interested in, and all of those forms of resilience are great, what I am interested in is that sense of spiritual resilience. The spiritual resilience that looks at the world as it is, fearlessly, and says, there is more love somewhere, I'm going to keep on till I find it. That resilience that looks at troubles, toils, and snares and says, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. How do we grow that type of spiritual resilience? I want to end with two suggestions, two ideas. One is that I believe that when we choose to expose ourselves to, study, retell, honor, and valorize stories of resilience and persistence, we ourselves get a little bit of that. And we ourselves are strengthened to be resilient. I think of that old book, Profiles in Courage, where it was suggested that by studying people who acted courageously, that we might actually have a little bit of that courage. We might actually learn a little bit of that courage ourselves. Perhaps we need some profiles in resilience. Some profiles in resilience to remember what Howard Thurman called the remembered radiance of those four resilient people. So the first way is to choose to expose ourselves to study, retell, and honor, and valorize those stories of resilience. And the second way to become more resilient is to connect more deeply with communities and movements that foster resilience while advocating and working for the dignity and humanity of all people. Communities and movements that foster resilience and work to uphold the dignity of all people. When we connect with them, we challenge the myth of our own aloneness and separateness and aloofness. We realize that our power is connected with one another. We feel the power stir within us, and we ourselves are led to grow through resilient community. As you go forth this day, honor those heroes of resilience, connect more deeply with movements and communities that foster resilience. Go forth with courage. Go forth with love. Amen. Blessed be. We're going to sing our closing hymn this morning. It's one that I've been looking forward to singing all morning. It is number 151, I Wish I Knew How. And as our band's been fantastic this morning. If our band joins us, let us rise in body or in spirit and sing out.